Hello, and welcome to KRSC Beyond the Ordinary Webcast Radio, where we'll just see how the urban survival is doing right here with your hosts, Nancy and Elena.
Yeah.
Is the urban surviving?
Well, there's not a question of urban surviving right now, but as we stretch out into 2009, it's going to get really interesting. Now, as I recall, you've had Cliff from halfpasthuman.com on, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. Cliff, I just got off the phone with him about half an hour ago. He said that he was still accruing data under earthquakes because last time we chatted I said, we're looking for economic impacts to come out of this. It looked like it would start around December 10 or 12, and then over the course of several days, we would have a big earthquake. And then we'd wait a couple of days after that, and we'd have another earthquake. And that was all supposed to happen on a day of the week when kids were in school. It was supposed to happen on the tail end of some real bad storms and bad weather. So we're really kind of in prime time for the earthquake. But what's interesting is that we have had a couple of major, I'd call them financial earthquakes go off this week. One of them, of course, is the Bernie Madoff story. You've undoubtedly been seeing the headlines on it about the $50 billion that potentially is lost due to what was described by the feds as a giant Ponzi scheme. The problem with that is that it may just be the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be some huge ripple coming out from the Madoff scandal. One of them is that several hedge funds have had big portions of their investments tied up with Madoff. 10, 12, 15% kind of numbers for certain hedge funds of their portfolio being at risk. There's also some suggestion now that came out Monday that the federal government may try to come up with some sort of victim compensation for the people who had money with Madoff so that they can get their money back. Now, I'm just a regular plain old taxpayer with no special interest or country club membership. And it just seems to me not quite even-handed. Not quite even-handed that the big players who lose money are getting bailed out, and those of us who I'd characterize as more the working class types are being pretty well ignored. And in fact, a week after the Obama election, you saw the U-turn that the Treasury Secretary took when Hank Paulson got up, I think it was November 12th or 13th, and basically said, well, no, helping the poor folks with, he didn't say poor folks, helping directly with home mortgages is not the most efficient thing. And then, of course, we got to Tuesday, today, and we see that the Federal Reserve has gone and set a target federal funds rate of 0% to a high of 0.25%, and they have set the Fed discount rate at 0.5%. So from a long wave economic perspective, the Federal Reserve has stepped away from helping regular working class America, and they have thrown their lot in with the Japanese central bank approach, which was to cut interest rates to 0 in 1989 after the Japanese stock market began to fall over. So it looks like we're going to go down the Japan route. Unfortunately, we have several major obstacles that will prevent the happy ending that Japan was shooting for. Japan, by the way, is still suffering from the effects of their economic meltdown that began in '89. Am I going on and on too much? You have to interrupt me with questions or something?
No, but I will take this interruption to tell people that who they're listening to is...
Oh, yeah,
well, that's right, by the way.
Yeah, it's George Ure, MBA. And the website, by the way, which is where I first heard of Madoff with $1 million.
Yeah, really.
Is urbansurvival.com.
And I should probably pitch my subscription newsletter at
Absolutely.
some point. And say for $40 a year, I've had people tell me it's one of the few remaining bargains in financial advice in the world. It's called Peoplenomics, people with a nomics on the end of it, .com. And, yeah, I guess we should have maybe started at the beginning and said, whoa, Mr. Ure is a long-time scholar of economic and has been writing about the potential for the financial implosion of the American economic system since he did a master's capstone project back in the early to mid-90s. That might have set up why I'm waxing eloquently about this stuff.
Well, people know that every program is archived, and they can go back to your first one to find out the beginnings.
Well, yeah, except I didn't do one in 1989. Of course, we didn't have computers like these either. But back in 1989, Japan went through a stock market bubble, sort of like ours, and the Nikkei 225 index, which is their equivalent of our Dow Jones Industrials, the Dow 30, it had popped up to around, I want to say, 44,800. And of course that's yen, so it's not as big a number as otherwise might be thought. But their economy began to implode. They ran into this horrible situation where they had a large number of population. A large segment was beginning to approach retirement age. And that's not unlike what's happening in the U.S. right now demographically. We've got our baby boomers are largely getting ready to retire, or at least were until the market decline started. And what happened in the course of like 1989 through about 93, 94 was the Nikkei had lost more than half of its value. And the last time I checked, the Nikkei was running in like even now, which is 19 years later, the Nikkei is only running at about 8,500. So you can see that the collapse of an economy, when it happens, you don't just bounce back from it. And there's also been some discussion on the internet whether when we had our first major economic depression in the U.S., whether the New Deal worked effectively either, in the sense that the New Deal did not really work because we ended up having to have World War II to finally get the economy out of what was called the secondary depression that began in about 1937-38. And it's very much analogous to what's going on now. We began our depression, I argue, when the internet bubble collapsed in 2000 or so. And when the internet bubble collapsed in 2000, we saw trillions of dollars lost in the internet go-go stocks. And it was only the fortuitous arrival, and I won't go into the conspiracy stuff because I'm sure you've had other guests that have talked about the lingering questions about 911. But it was the fortuitous arrival of 911 in an economic sense that allowed the United States to build a couple of brand new industries overnight. One of these was the war industry. And so Operation Iraqi Freedom became very important so that we kept the defense industries alive and hiring people. It also took a lot of people who otherwise would have hit unemployment rolls, took them and sent them off to the sandbox for tour after tour after tour in some cases. And at the same time that was going on, we also developed this industry called Homeland Security, for lack of a better general term for it. And so, in a sense, terrorism has been the modern analog to the Works Progress Administration and the WPA and the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, in the 1930s. So coming in, we've got a new president who's going to try to play the role of FDR. We've already sort of played the war card in terms of trying to get us through an economic slump. We've already, in a sense, played the CCC and the WPA with the invention of the security industry. And Obama's staff has made some considerable discussion about having national mandatory service for young people, sort of like a domestic Peace Corps or some kind of domestic security operation, all of which paints a really murky picture about some of what have been traditional American freedoms. Posse comitatus apparently is out the window because in California now we've got reports that U.S. military units are going to be stationed on road checkpoints with sheriffs and California highway patrolmen over the holidays for reasons that aren't clearly explained, but they're going to be involved in routine traffic stops for drunk driving checkpoints. It's like, what's that all about? So we're entering into some very difficult times. The Federal Reserve today has played it's almost like playing the ace up their sleeve in going to a nearly zero interest rate target, because what worked for Japan, and the only reason that the Japanese rate cut to 0% worked and kept the country from imploding, was that Japan had the market cornered on free money for a while. Japan was where big corporations, hedge funds, and so forth could go and borrow money for nothing, turn around and invest it in gold, which tracks, generally speaking, tends to track the